Hey everyone, it's time for another episode of Getting to Know the Family. Well, hello again. It's Scott Thomas with another episode of Getting to Know the Family, the show where we get to know you, the parishioners of Holy Family Parish here in San Jose. I'm here in the chapel, and I'm with this statue of the Holy Family. And I'm not sure, but I think it might be from the original parish location on River Street. If you know, leave a comment. I'd like to find out. While you're at it, go ahead and click subscribe and hit the little notification bell. That way you'll get notified every time we drop a new episode of Getting to Know the Family. In this episode, I sat down with Theresa Rieve, and I got to know her story. It's really a love story between her and her late husband, Richard Rieve. Sadly, Richard passed away in 2020. But you can still see the twinkle in her eye as she talks about marriage and what this parish meant to the both of them. So come along with me as we get to know Theresa Rieve. Welcome, Theresa, to Getting to Know the Family. We're glad to have you here today.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So tell me about how you came to Holy Family.
Well, the immediate thing was that Richard and I, Richard is my spouse, which he passed away last year. But so we had just bought a house in San Jose, and we moved in April 8th, 1972. And at first, I was going over to St. Francis Cabrini Church, because when we drove in to get to our house, you came off 17 and had to drive up Camden to get to where we were living. And we passed St. Francis Cabrini Church, so okay, there's a Catholic church over there. But at that time, I went to that church for 6 months. And everybody in the church was standing. I mean, it could have been a pandemic for all the social distancing that was happening, because everybody sat as far as they could from anybody except in their family. They were just in the far corners of the church and just as far away from anybody as they could be. And for 6 months, no one said so much as hello. And I was feeling very, gosh, what's going on here? You know, this isn't the way I've experienced church before. And so I was talking to the neighbor that my kids played with. At that time we still had some stay-at-home moms. And so I was home with my kids and she was home with her kids, and the kids would play together. So I was talking to her about how it would be so good if the churches were more like neighborhood churches. And she said, you have to come to my church. And I said, oh, what's your church? I was afraid it would be a Protestant church. She said, oh, Holy Family. You come to church with me Sunday. So I did. And well, Richard and I both came. We came to church with her, and oh my gosh. It was at the time when we had the 4 Jesuits. It was Brother Al and Father Bernie, Father Frank, and Father Gary. For a minute, I almost blanked on those names. But anyway, so everything was so, the music and the sermons and everything was so full of life. And they had just redecorated for fall. They already had the Art and Environment Ministry going. They had just redecorated with a Thanksgiving theme, because this was like late October, early November. And everything, I mean, right down to the handmade embroidery in the cloths where the Bible or the chalice, whatever stood. It was like, oh my gosh, you know, this is what, and it felt like home, because I had grown up in Gallup, New Mexico. They had Franciscans, and the Franciscans were very friendly. We lived right next door to the church, so my dad could go watch TV and have a beer with the priests, and the priest would be out on the school grounds during recess playing with the kids, you know. So this is what I grew up with. And so that's why St. Francis Cabrini seemed so weird to me, you know, with their with all their social distancing. And here people were hugging each other and just friendly, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is what church is supposed to be, right? Because that's what I grew up with. And well, and the other thing was that when I went to the office and signed up to register for the parish, halfway through the next week, Father Bernie Brannon gave me a personal phone call to welcome me to the parish. And it was like, whoa, you know, so different. So
So it felt like home. It was
Yeah.
family. Okay. So what was it like growing up in New Mexico? Tell me
Well,
about your childhood.
Actually, well, I was born in Minnesota, and we had a small organic farm up there, and one of the big memories I have is being able to run through the grass barefoot. And when we moved to New Mexico, there was no grass. You know, it's mostly, you know, the high in the mountains, Gallup, New Mexico, and lots of red clay and red rocks, but not a lot of grass or trees or anything like that. So it was so on that side, scenery-wise, I never felt at home, which is one reason why I left to go, as soon as I was old enough to go to college, I left to find a greener place. But the other part, the part that was good was the part of the people. Very, you know, it was a friendly place in terms of people. And, you know, and like we had the priest right next door to us, and my mom was teaching in the school, and so, and she was also involved in all kinds of social ministry, and she was going out to homes and teaching parents how to teach their children, things like that. So everybody knew who the Cullens were.
So how old were you when you moved from Minnesota to New Mexico?
I was 10.
Okay. So old enough to have vivid memories of Minnesota, like
Yeah.
riding in the grass. Okay. Yeah, I was born in Massachusetts and around 6 or 7 moved to Arizona. So it was a similar
Yeah.
transition of like, you know, and just remember how hot it was, right?
Yeah,
And very different scenery. Right?
yeah.
Okay. And so then you moved away from New Mexico when you went to college. Where did you
Right.
go to college?
Well, I got a scholarship to Mount St. Mary's College. It's up in the hills above LA,
Okay.
but my sister had also moved to LA because she found a job there. And so she had asked me she had told me I could stay at her apartment, and there were people that, you know, like I was carpooling up to the college. It was a long drive, but it was, you know, anyway, I got to school. But so yeah, and Mount St. Mary's was a good place, but I didn't finish my college because, you know, what happened was, okay, so my sister was living in LA with a roommate, and I moved in with them. And the roommate went out to March Air Force Base to visit her boyfriend for the weekend. And she sprained her thumb, couldn't drive back to LA. And her boyfriend was a boy from Kentucky who was absolutely not going to drive in LA, no matter what. So they went scouting around the base looking for somebody to give them a ride to LA. It was March is about 100 miles from where we were living. But, so they're scouting around the base, and they see Richard washing his car. And so they call out, "Hey, Rieve, give us a ride to LA?" And he says, "Oh, sure, got nothing better to do." So he gave them a ride to LA. And he's always said that from the minute he walked into the apartment and he says, "The first time I laid eyes on you, I knew that you were the person I wanted to live my life with, the rest of my life." And, you know, well, he had to convince me, because I had gone to LA convinced that I was going to be a famous scientist someday. Maybe I'd find a cure for a dread disease, and maybe I'd win a Nobel Prize or something. So that took some convincing. Because
So how did he convince you?
he just kept telling me he loved me, and he kept, basically, he was driving in from the base 100 miles every weekend so that he could come up and visit me. And so that took a lot of commitment. And well, the other kind of funny thing is, before he even, he just asked me if he could come up to the apartment and see me again. And that's as far as our relationship had gone at that point. But he went up to visit his parents, who lived in the Bay Area. And he told them he'd found the woman that he wanted to live his life with. And so he was like miles ahead of that.
Man on a mission.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, he also said that his goals in life, see, my goal was to be famous. His goal was to have a wife and a job and some kids. And he was going to support his wife and kids, and that was it.
Simple traditional life. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, very, very different personalities, very different ways of thinking about life.
Yeah.
What was it like being married to Richard?
Well, the one thing was that we each had such different talents that we kind of divided things up. And one thing that we always said is that he's the yin to my yang, the Mary to my Martha, the Venus to my Mars. And I even, just for the heck of it, looked up astrology and found out that he's a Taurus, which is an earth symbol, and I'm a Sagittarius, which is a fire symbol. And they said that, and it said that the symbol for the earth symbol is a hearth. So you have a hearth and you have a fire. So that was interesting. But we always said we're like two halves of a whole. And as long as we each respected the talent the other one had, then it was great. So yeah, that was basically the way we worked. It was like the two halves fit together. And and if we had ever separated, then we'd have been just two halves.
So you're married, and how many children?
3.
3 children. Okay. What was it like as a young couple with a young family? Tell me what was life like as you began your family?
Well, one thing was Richard had a pretty long commute because the freeways around here were not good. There weren't very many of them, and you had to spend a lot of time on city streets, even to get to a freeway. So, I mean, it would amaze some people that it would take him a minimum of an hour to get from San Jose to Menlo Park.
And did you come, because you met in LA, he was in the Air Force down in LA. What brought you to San Jose, I guess?
His parents.
Okay, so this is where family was, and he wanted to be close to family. And so,
right, that's exactly, yeah. He wanted to be close to his family. So when he got out of even before he got out of the Air Force, because his family started, after we had decided we were going to get married, then they wanted me to come work in their business, and they wanted me to come stay at their house during vacations and things like that. So it was kind of natural that he did get sent to Turkey, and I followed him to Turkey. So I did get to, there's a few people in the parish too that also were in Turkey about that time, but I never met them, of course. But we were at it. It was it was Incirlik Air Base. And there's a lot of people in the, I keep finding people in this parish that were also there, but we never met. Anyway, so the first part of our marriage, we were in Turkey. But when he got out of the service, he wanted to be just back in the States, back where his family was, working in their business. So, that's how we ended up back in the Bay Area.
My recollection, it's always been the two of you were like inseparable, and anytime here in the parish. And Richard would always ask me, it's like, have you been on Marriage Encounter? Every time I saw him, he would ask me about that. So that was clearly a passion of his, and I think a passion of yours. Tell me about the Marriage Encounter ministry. How did you get involved in that?
Well, first, early when we I was a mom with young kids staying home for the first few years of our marriage, and I was going to women's Bible study here at Holy Family, and Sharon Coulter, who she and her husband Harry had been on a Marriage Encounter weekend not too long before that. And in the women's Bible study, she was telling us about this wonderful weekend they'd gone on and how much it had revitalized their marriage. And I was thinking, that's what I want. And so now at that point, Richard was not going to church. He was baptized a Lutheran, and he had grown up going to every different kind of Protestant church you could imagine. And his parents thought I was okay, but they didn't really like the Catholic Church. It was like, okay, that's something, okay, she's Catholic, but she's okay, kind of thing. And so Richard was very reluctant to get too involved in the church, and at that point he was not going to church. And so I would go home and I would tell him, like I told him what Sharon told us in the Bible study, and he said no. And over the next 18 years, various times people would be up there in the pulpit at Holy Family telling about the Marriage Encounter weekend and how it changed their marriage, and I'd go home and tell Richard, and he would say no. And there was a point when it was around our 25th wedding anniversary. And, well, me being the doer, the person that's always out getting involved in stuff and whatnot, you get involved in so many things that it kind of creates spaces because you're not really paying attention to each other the way you are to everything else. And so at that point, he was kind of getting the feeling that our relationship was starting to come apart a little bit because, just that feeling of there's kind of a feeling of loneliness when you're not really spending a lot of time with your spouse. And so that time when it just so happened to be that it was Ray Gans that was talking about Marriage Encounter at that time. And when we went to an information talk that Ray and Jane were giving, and when he heard Ray's testimony, he said, okay, I'll go. Now, when we were on our weekend, he was kind of iffy still, but we were on the weekend, and he said to me, you know what? If I'd known this was what it was, I'd have gone a long time ago. So anyway, and that was just the beginning of his, it was kind of a gradual thing, working his way into becoming more involved in Marriage Encounter. But as you said, eventually he became a missionary for Marriage Encounter. He just felt, it was like he was compelled to tell people about Marriage Encounter. And our relationship also grew tremendously through Marriage Encounter. When Richard joined the church in 1999, we'd been married almost 30 years by then. And most of that time he'd been resisting becoming a Catholic. But, well, actually, this is another story. The national priest for Marriage Encounter happened to be at a convention in Reno in 1998. Richard went up to communion, and he had wanted to receive the Eucharist, but he didn't want to be a Catholic. So he's going, how come I can't get I want to get the Eucharist. I don't want to be Catholic. But he went up there to the altar like this. And when he walked out of church, that priest looked him in the eye and said, you know, I just wonder why you're not a Catholic, because I saw something in your eyes when you came up for the Eucharist, and I just want to know, why aren't you a Catholic? And Richard said, I don't know. That was the only thing that could come into his mind. I don't know. And so the next day we were back home again, and he called Blessy and said, I want to be an RCIA. So, and then the takeaway that he came up with later was that he had been afraid to go on a marriage encounter weekend because he was afraid somebody would come up and knock him over the head and make him be a Catholic, figuratively, of course. And he said, what I found out was they won't force you into the church. They'll love you into it. And that was something that just, it's something that I always remember. They won't force you into the church. They'll love you into it. So
sounds like the church was pursuing him like he was pursuing you.
Yeah,
he
that
needed
is
to be
kind
convinced.
of true.
But we kept telling him, we love you.
As a matter of fact, Ruth Spencer told him when he actually signed up for RCIA, she heard that Blessy LaScala was in charge then, but Ruth Spencer heard about it. She's in case the newer people don't know, Ruth Spencer was the one that got RCIA started Holy Family. But when she heard that he was in RCIA, she said, it's about time you joined the church. You've been knocking around in it for long enough.
What was it like for you during that period? Both before, before, during, and after. You were telling us, Richard's story, which is an important part of that.
Me,
but what was it like?
So
what was it like for you?
Right? I was, for one thing, I was fully involved at Holy Family. I was teaching either the kids that we used to call it sermonette, but the dismissal for
children's
of the
liturgy,
young
the word.
children, right? And so I taught that, and also I was teaching some of as long as they were teaching in the homes, I was teaching the younger grades.
Okay.
The religious
ed.
So that was one thing, and we had family masses. I got totally involved in that too. And I was involved with arts and environment because it was something I could do from home. And so, because you're sewing, a lot of it was sewing. And so that was something I could do from home. And I could still concentrate on kids.
Okay.
So
when we had Bobby on the show, she was telling us about all the handmade banners and all that. So you were part of making those handmade banners?
Yeah. I was involved in arts and environment and in education at that point. Which it was interesting that I ever got to become a teacher, because being a teacher was one of the things I never wanted to do. And I used to just think, okay, the real teachers can teach my kids, because I do not know how to discipline in a classroom. I would have a classroom full of monsters. But when I came over to sign my kids up for religious ed, and they were telling us about the program at that point where it was in the homes, and they were telling us about how they wanted to start this program of teaching the kids in the church, letting them go hear the gospel at their own level. And I just got so excited. I came in adamant that I was not going to be a teacher, and I was so excited when I heard about this program that it was just, it felt to me, this is a picture in my mind, it felt to me like God picked me up and turned me 180 degrees and said, you're a teacher. And so I got into those programs and actually taught for 22 years. But there was one thing that I learned through that too, is because I could make out a perfect lesson plan and go into the classroom and start to teach the kids, and they'd be those, there'd be kids running around the back or whatever, and they weren't paying attention. But if I started beforehand, I'd make the lesson plan, but I'd start beforehand and I would say, okay, Holy Spirit, you've got to help me with this because I can't do this. So you have to help me. Just use me as a channel to tell these kids what they need to learn. Mm-hmm. So I'd have the same lesson plan, but it was like I wasn't the teacher now. Because, it was like because everybody's a teacher and everybody's a learner at all times, right? So I found that if I put everything in the hands of the Holy Spirit, all of a sudden, the difference, even though it was the same lesson plan, the kids were rapt. They were hanging on every word. And so I could still say, I'm not a teacher. I'm just the conduit.
So I conclude all of our interviews with the same set of questions. So I'm going to ask those of you now. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word. Okay, so I think harmony has great sound, but the word community really resonates a little more with me. And the reason is because community is union with, okay? So when you're in a community, you're in union with whoever else is part of that community. Doesn't matter who they are. You are in a relationship with them because you are in unity with them. And I think harmony, people tend to think it's just those tones in the music, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, so everything is peace and calm. Community says we got to work for it.
What is your least favorite word?
I'm thinking cacophony. That discordant.
The opposite of harmony.
Yeah. Everything clashing sounds, noise, that kind of thing.
What turns you on? What gets you excited?
Talking about marriage, talking about having a relationship with Jesus. I mean, I think you kind of picked up on that.
And that's evident. I think that's evident. You've proven that here today. What turns you off?
What turns me off? People that make trouble, people that are like, I'm not sure if the word is hateful. Sometimes the word is too set in their ways or too, they think they have the only answer. It's kind of like the Pharisees and the scribes and Pharisees you keep hearing about in the gospel. Well, they weren't all that strident, our way or no way. But a lot of times the people that say our way or no way are not paying attention to Jesus at all because it's his way, right? Yeah. It's not our way.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sounds do I love? Well, I do love music. I think one of the most beautiful places on earth is up at Uva's Canyon when the water's running, because they have a stream that runs through Uva's Canyon, and just being out there among the trees and it goes back to that same thing, running through the grass and back in the farm in Minnesota, the greenery, and you can be just out there in the woods, and you can be by the stream, and you can listen to the water. Mm-hmm. That's a totally peaceful setting.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Again, the loud noises, something like breaking glass, car horns honking, or cars crunching, or those sorts of sounds, things that are breaking, or those kinds of sounds are just. And again, it's something loud as opposed to something peaceful.
Okay. Who is your favorite saint?
My favorite saint, that would be Saint Theresa of Lisieux. Like the Blessed Virgin's in there because she's the one I go to when You know, I'll say, O most holy, blessed Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who fled to your protection was left unaided. You know, that's a favorite prayer. But when it comes to looking at a saint's life, Saint Theresa of Lisieux is the one that comes to mind. She's my patron saint. And that she, one of the things she said was, for instance, she had that little story about the ball. That, you know, the ball can be in the corner, but she said, Jesus, make me like a ball. You can play with me, or you can leave me sit on the side, whatever. But you know, I'm just like a ball in your hands.
Okay.
And,
I hadn't heard that story of hers.
You know, and the other thing, you know, it's about the little way, because I always had this desire to be famous and independent and all those things, but I find that, you know, I felt like I was failing at doing that sort of thing, but I could be successful if I was doing things, following the little way, you know, doing things for my family, doing things for my parish or my community. You know, they're little ways of changing the world. And so she's the saint of the little way, and that's the thing that, you know, when I read her story of a soul, it was just like, oh yes, this really is the way that I was called to be, is to follow the little way.
What ministry or occupation, other than one you've done, would you most like to try?
Actually, you know, with the pandemic, there's so many things that are shut down and everything. But with me, when I was ministering to Richard, I really noticed how much of a difference it made when, for instance, when Eucharistic ministers would come to the house, or when anybody would come to visit, how much he loved to have that extra human company. And so I, you know, whenever we get back to, you know, eventually I am going to sign up for homebound ministry, because I, you know, I have felt called to that ever since I saw how much it affected Richard.
I think you would be wonderful at that.
Yeah, and the other one is that someone challenged me to do. I have had the great good fortune to have a Stevens minister to walk with me this past year. And the person who offered me the Stevens ministry is a really, really old and dear friend who happens to head the Stevens ministry at St. Catherine's. And she said, you know, right now Stevens ministry is kind of, you know, not really active at Holy Family. And she said, but Holy Family was the one that reached out to St. Catherine's and helped us get Stevens ministry started. And so what she said to me was, I hope that maybe if you experience Stevens ministry, you might be able to help revive it at Holy Family. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen or if that's true or not, but it is something that's kind of in the background that maybe I could help with that, because I did, because having experienced Stevens ministry, I just think that it's such a great ministry to have available to people.
What ministry or occupation would you not like to try?
Well, you know what? If I really say I can't do this, then sometimes I get told, no, you are going to do that, right? But I would say that, you know, things that are mechanical or things like that like Richard was a machinist for 45 years as his career. And he could make things that were, so they call it like 10 thousandths tolerance, but they say it's way smaller than a human hair, that you can make the accurate that close. And That's something I wouldn't even want to try.
Okay.
I can operate a sewing machine. I couldn't operate a 24-foot lathe that's putting all this, cutting all this metal and whatnot.
What would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You know what I hope he says? I hope he says, "Welcome! I've been waiting for you."
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
That's the end of another episode. I'd like to thank Theresa for sitting down with me and sharing her story. If you'd like to share your story, contact Christina in the parish office. We'd love to have you on an upcoming episode of Getting to Know the Family. Until then, I'll see you in the pews.